When a 10-year-old committed an unforgivable act, it was uncovered that they had a history of violence and trauma that hadn't been fully disclosed to the foster family taking care of them. However, was this an accident or murder? Either way, this baby went to daycare one day and never returned home. Doctors claim that the shoe marks on his head pointed to this being intentional. Should this 10-year-old have been tried as an adult? You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna. And wow, this one is very hard to stomach, that a child could kill another child. This one is one that will really pull on your heartstrings, especially when you hear just what this baby's father has done for his son who passed away, just how he feels about the sentencing that did occur, or lack thereof. I also want to thank our sponsor, Toon Blast, a free-to-play mobile game where you can solve puzzles by blasting cubes and creating powerful combos. There are so many levels too, over 7,000, so you can travel around this magical world. And there are also mini games as well. It's an endless amount of content that you can play on any device at any time. Honestly, it's one of the most satisfying games I've ever played, especially when you end up completing a puzzle within just a few moves left on your countdown. So you can download the link in my description to play for free, and you can use the QR code, and if you download from my video, you will end up getting 3 hours of unlimited lives and 100 free coins. It's a great deal. Highly recommend it. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2018 in Wisconsin, and a mother and father in Chippewa Falls had a 6-month-old son named Jackson Robert Hunter. Now, he was born on April 6th of 2018, and his parents were Stephanie Hunter and Nathan Lydell. Now, their son Jackson was said to be a happy, bubbly, smiling baby boy, and Samantha and Nathan weren't actually together when he was born, and he mainly was with his mother. However, he did spend about 8 hours a week with his father, and they were working towards more visitation hours for his father as well. And Nathan was said to feel so lucky that he finally had his own child, that he wasn't even a fussy baby. He was always just happy and rolling around, swinging his arms, and had this wide, priceless smile. Now, while they worked, they actually left Jackson at a licensed daycare provider at Amber's Pals and Playmates. Now, this was a daycare run from inside of a regular home of Amber and Dan Sweeney, and there were said to be 6 children in total being watched at this daycare, including Jackson. Now, Amber and Dan were also foster parents who had children in their care, 24/7, so some of those children were just their foster children, but they had approval to run a daycare as well as taking care of these foster children. And so Stephanie's older child, she had another child who was older than Jackson, and her older child had gone to this daycare for years, so she felt safe sending Jackson there as well. However, on October 30th of 2018, a 911 call would be placed from this daycare, and this was about an unresponsive baby who was bleeding from the head.
He's having a hard time breathing and his head is swelling.
Now, Jackson was rushed to St. Joseph Hospital, and the parents were informed, and they had no idea how serious the injuries were. The doctors suddenly were talking about airlifting him to a bigger hospital in Minnesota, and once he got to this Gillette Children's Specialty Healthcare Hospital, the father heard the doctors talking about what they were going to do if his heart stopped, and that's when he knew how dire the situation was, and he began to call all the family members, telling them he was most likely not going to make it. Jackson's father, Nathan, had arrived at the daycare around the time that the ambulance arrived for Jackson, and the daycare operator, Amber, started running towards him, saying that it was Jackson, and telling him to go with him. And so at this point at the hospital, he just started to break down. And the woman who ran the daycare were talked to by police and told the police that the baby was napping the last time that she checked on him, and the other children were said to be outside playing so that he could nap peacefully. She was outside with the other kids blowing leaves at this time.
The caller indicated that she had discovered a 6-month male who she was doing daycare for was bleeding from the head and was unresponsive.
However, Sheriff James Kowalski would receive a call from the hospital, and that is when the doctors told him that they believed the injuries were not an accident. There were shoe patterns left on his head, and the autopsy allegedly revealed that he had been stomped on several times. That's when everyone in this home of this daycare was questioned, and it was revealed that the 10-year-old girl, who was not only at this daycare but one of the foster children of Amber and Dan, had gone inside during the time when she was supposed to be outside and was seen inside right before the baby was found. Now, when this 10-year-old was spoken to, she immediately confessed her involvement. She would be referred to as AF, as her name wasn't released due to the fact that she was a minor. So AF said that she went inside, Jackson was crying in his crib, she picked him up to soothe him, and she dropped him, and he then hit his head on the footstool. At this point, he began to cry even more, and she said that she panicked, and so she began to stomp on his head. She said she didn't know what to do, didn't want to get in trouble for making him cry, so she placed him back in the crib and told him she was sorry. Amber said she couldn't see or hear Jackson or AF when this happened, and that AF didn't tell anyone after this happened, and so Amber had gone in to check on Jackson, and when she found him in that state, she immediately called 911. AF's tread on her shoes were then matched to the patterns of the bruises on Jackson's head, and they were a match. And a day after arriving at the hospital on November 1st, Jackson passed away, and his cause of death was due to multiple skull fractures. Now, AF was found to have been a foster care child for about a year. She was taken from her parents September 2017, and her parents were allegedly drug users, and AF was often neglected and abused, and she was taken into state custody. Now, that September, they had known about this because a report of neglect was made, and so she and her siblings were all placed in foster care, and so caseworker Matt Anderson was put in charge of her case. And as months went by, he would report that AF had some behavioral issues, that she would have intense tantrums where she would physically be aggressive with her parents, and she would pinch and hit her younger brothers. She would also often try to run away from home. Now, while these are telltale signs of RAD, this is not something that the foster care system likes to admit to, so instead, it was no surprise when this caseworker simply believed that this was due to her being in this home and that her behavior wouldn't follow, which in some cases can be true. Once out of a traumatic environment, they can thrive. However, a lot of the times, the trauma does follow and it does continue, and help is needed. Sometimes help doesn't work, but it is needed. However, AF did not get this. So AF was placed in foster care for the next 7 months, but in April of 2018, she was placed back in the care of her biological parents. In August, she would be voluntarily committed to a mental health hospital because she had begun to harm herself after she had confessed that she had been sexually assaulted by a neighbor child. Now, AF admitted that she did have these suicidal thoughts, but that she didn't want to act on them. So the county, as well as the caseworker, decided to place her back in foster care at the end of that month, though this was said to be for respite, or a short placement period where they are just trying to have this separation between the parents and the child. And this was because during an investigation of this assault, it was found that AF's neighbor had been in a fight with her after he refused to leave her alone, and AF's biological father would admit that she beat the out of him and was very angry and aggressive. So they wanted to get her out of this situation, and that's why in late August 2018, AF was placed with foster parents Amber and Dan Sweeney. Now, AF wasn't there long, but Amber and Dan claimed that she didn't exhibit any sort of concerning behavior. However, they hadn't really gotten to know her yet. She was then placed back with her biological parents, but this wouldn't last long because on September 19th of 2018, the caseworker was informed that AF had bruises on her arms and that she may be a victim of domestic abuse. During this investigation, AF's father allegedly told the caseworker she was bruised because he was trying to hold her back from running away. But she was once again taken away from her parents, placed into foster care, and she went back to the Sweeneys, even though she said she didn't want to because she wanted to go somewhere with less children. Now, an emergency order approved this placement because AF had become physically aggressive with her parents and younger brother. She was engaging in behaviors that were dangerous to her own safety, including running away. She had no regard for her own safety. She didn't have a plan. She had even written death on her arm. Yet Amber hadn't seen any of this behavior in these short periods that she was with AF. Now, Jackson's mother, Stephanie, had even dropped off her son at daycare and had met AF. She had spoken to her. She saw that she was playing with Jackson, and everything seemed normal. This 10-year-old was then charged as an adult with first-degree intentional homicide. She was charged as an adult due to Wisconsin's law that demands that defendants above the age of 10 can be tried in adults court, and she was 10. Now, this is a recent change according to law professor Adam Stevenson, and it had originally been 12 years or older. Now, AF was brought to the courtroom handcuffed with a leather restraint around her waist, and her bond was set at $50,000. Now, Wisconsin state law required that the initial court date would be held in adult court. However, her defense asked for a smaller bond, saying that she would like to return home, and given her age, that would be appropriate. And during this court date, AF was seen sobbing in her biological mother's arms, who was allowed to be there in the courtroom with her to support her. Now, obviously, we don't have the name of the biological mother or father either, because that would identify AF, but Jackson's father, Nathan, was also there, and he said he didn't see a 10-year-old girl. He saw the person who killed his son. And in his opinion, she deserved to be in shackles or handcuffs because she was a criminal. However, he says he doesn't blame the daycare foster parents that were watching over him. He says that no one would be able to imagine what this girl would do. That it may have started as an accident when she dropped him, but it quickly changed as she began to stomp on his son. That she had the ability to prevent irreparable damage, and she didn't. And AF was seen in court coloring a unicorn. Now, AF was being held at the Winnebago Mental Health Institute as the youngest person there, and AF's biological mother was seen supporting her in the courtroom, and she came forward and had an interview saying that the death was accidental, that she believed her daughter, that it's not what it seems, and it was not intentional. Her mother said AF is scared where she's being held, that there's no playground, that she eats PB&Js, and that although the public believed that her daughter was a monster, she was an intelligent young girl who dreams of one day becoming a doctor and helping people.
Do you remember this moment here in court?
I do. It was one of the saddest days that I've ever had to go through. At 10, your brain can't process half the stuff that me or you or anybody else can. She is beautiful, intelligent, smart, loves to sing, loves to play.
Though her mother did admit that she had tried to help AF with her mental health issues long before all of this, and she claimed that she was turned down because of AF's age.
She had suicidal indentations, yes.
And you couldn't get her help?
I could not. They sent her home because apparently suicide had an age limit.
She said that if she was able to get her daughter help, she wouldn't have been in foster care at all. This would have never happened. But she also said that AF's brothers, her biological brothers, are always talking about how much they miss her. AF's biological father was also in the courtroom, and he was said to have an outburst during one of the hearings and had to be escorted out. Now, a GoFundMe was then launched to raise the bail money for AF, and this was posted by a family friend who said that AF was sweet, loving, caring, and deserved to be with her family, though not much was actually raised before it was taken down. In 2019, AF's case was sent to juvenile court instead, and she was then found not competent to stand trial. However, they said she could be found competent at a later date, though the trial was suspended at this point. However, due to her being in the juvenile court, her case is most likely to be sealed to the public, and most likely, due to this being juvenile court, a sentence won't be handed down. They focus more on rehabilitation over sentencing, and these children can also be released once they're 18 as a free citizen. So even though we won't really know what has happened, it's most likely that she is getting the most lenient sentence possible.
Each state does it differently. In Minnesota, we have a cutoff at age 14, where someone who's under the age of 14 cannot be certified to adult courts. In Wisconsin, it's different. In Wisconsin, someone who's charged with a murder conviction is presumptively put into adult court. They'll ask that this gets sent back to the juvenile court. So that'll be the first issue the court will determine substantively is, should this case go back to juvenile court? Would society and this particular individual be served by having this case in juvenile court? The adult court is more about responsibility and accountability and, quite frankly, punishment. That's where you get sent to prison. If you're in juvenile court, the idea is, and there's a jurisdictional limit. Most times, if after you hit 18 or 21, then you are done with your particular criminal sentence. If you get sentenced in adult court, you can serve the rest of your life in prison.
Now, Dr. Deborah Collins believes that AF suffers from PTSD, as well as disruptive mood and deregulation disorder and adjustment disorder with depression. She said that with routine, she could gain competency and be able to go to trial within the year. Though another doctor, Dr. Michael Caldwell, said that she is functioning like a 7-year-old, it was unlikely that she would be able to be competent within the year. And the judge then ordered AF to be turned over to the Department of Health Services for a year so she could get treatment and education at a mental health facility. But Nathan believed that the Wisconsin juvenile system failed his family. He said that he understands that you can't lock them away for life, you can't do 25 years, but it doesn't seem like there was much of a punishment when there was a death. So in 2020, Jackson's parents actually filed a lawsuit against the Chippewa County Department of Human Services, as well as the director, who was Tim Easker, the foster care coordinator, Serena Schultz, and the social workers who worked on AF's case. Their belief was that the government officials were responsible for placing AF in a foster home and depriving Jackson of his rights, and that ultimately it was a state-created danger, which is actually an exception to the rule that government officials have no duty to protect individuals. But in this doctrine of the state-created danger, they are obliged to protect from dangers that the government itself created. The daycare provider and foster mom, Amber, said that she would have never thought AF would harm another child in her home. However, it was claimed that the caseworker did not tell the foster parents about AF's background, which is actually quite common, unfortunately. Things are sealed up and kept quiet, and this was even after the social worker had given AF a test to see where she should be placed to determine her level of need, and he had found that she was a low rating, meaning that she didn't have much issues in the categories of suicide risk, behavioral aggression, and being a runaway, even though all of those things had already been confirmed. It was believed that if Amber had this information, she could have kept a closer eye on Jackson or AF while she was home. This lawsuit was very controversial, and nobody wanted to see it actually be won by the parents, because in that case it would mean that a troubled child could never be placed in a foster home with other children, which is something that the foster system doesn't want to happen, of course, because even at the risk of other children or adults being harmed, that would lose them money. So it was found by this lawsuit that AF didn't pose obvious risk of harm to Jackson or any other children, and the decision to place her there did not violate the Constitution. So this lawsuit was dismissed, and Jackson's father, Nathan, said he was frustrated and disappointed, and he was likely to appeal. Not only do we have the added fact of the foster system fighting against justice for these parents, we also have the fact that this is a child who did this, and those two combined make it very hard to receive justice. And so there was another case that happened 5 years after Jackson's death, which you might have heard of, that really struck a chord with Jackson's father, Nathan, due to this also being a kid who was killed by a kid.
Lily Peters hadn't returned home after visiting her aunt on North Grove Street. Officers found her bicycle near the woods of a walking trail between that street and the Leinenkugel Brewery's parking lot. Monday morning, first responders found her body.
This was the case of Lily Peters, 10-year-old girl from the same county as Jackson, literally the same exact area. And Lily was killed and sexually assaulted on April 24th of 2022. Lily's killer was quite young as well, being a 14-year-old boy named Carson Petersberger, who turned out to be her cousin. Lily and Carson had gone on a bike ride from her home to her aunt's house, but then she went missing. And no one knew that she was with her cousin when she vanished. But her bike was found by her father during a search that day, and the next day her body was located in the woods. Her mother was there, sobbing as she was found, and she had been beaten and strangled to death. It was believed that Carson had taken her to the middle of nowhere, punched her in the stomach, pushed her to the ground, hit her head 3 times with a large stick, and then strangled her. And then, horrifically enough, once she was deceased, he sexually assaulted her body. The 14-year-old boy then went home, showered, cleaned his clothes before going back to Lily's body and concealing it. Carson would be arrested 2 days later, and he would confess that he had planned all of this. His DNA was also found on her body. And in September 2022, he was charged as an adult. However, his defense filed a motion to move his case to juvenile court, just as AF's case had done. Now, the hearing for this is actually coming up soon, scheduled for August 2023, to determine whether it will be moved to juvenile court or whether it will stay in adult court. And Judge Stephen Gibbs has ruled that the crime scene photos won't be shown at this hearing, and lawyers won't be able to talk about Carson's character. Though I can tell you that Carson had threatened to hurt Lily prior to this. And Carson's own father was found to be a convicted pedophile. He had been charged with possession of child photos in 2018. And he had claimed that when he was released, he wanted custody of his son because his son was the best of him. Unfortunately, just like with Jackson's case, if Lily's case is moved to juvenile court, we might not get any answers on how Carson is dealt with. He could simply be sent home.
The statements that the defendant made to law enforcement that his intention was to rape and kill the victim from the get-go when he left the house with the victim going down the trail. State believes that there is a need to protect the community.
He is currently in a juvenile detention center, and justice for Lily has yet to be given. Jackson's father, Nathan, says that he knows that a child charged with a kid's death is very conflicting. And in general, we know the kids who kill cases are controversial. The belief that children can't have dark motives, and mental health services denying treatment for kids, believing that they're not as bad, or believing they have to be older to have those actual issues, or just simply not caring. Nathan said he now has a wall dedicated to Jackson with pictures and gifts in memory of him, and he's always looking at videos and pictures.
Pictures kind of say it. He was always smiling. He was always like this. He never had a bad day. He just seemed like he was always full of life, always happy.
And Nathan actually created a nonprofit called Win for Jax to benefit child victims of crime with memorials or monuments.
After Jackson passed away, there was a huge outpouring of support from a lot of times from people that we didn't even know. It made me realize that helping someone else would be a great way to honor Jackson.
The name actually came because he and Jackson loved to watch football together. They would watch the Vikings football games, and it was always a tradition. And so after Jackson died, one of Nathan's friends actually posted on Facebook that the Vikings should hashtag Win for Jax.
And a symbol.
This photo was at the hospital. It's just the innocence that it was. I guess that he was still hanging on up right up until the last day.
And Nathan said it now represents wins for child victims.
It's brought him back alive in so many ways, and the excitement, the passion behind it, it's been really great to see. He even met his fiance through this horrific situation. She'd been his neighbor, and she started bringing him food when she heard the news, and then they fell in love. Jackson's case is not believed to have gone to trial at this time, though AF is supposed to be undergoing psychological evaluation every year to determine competence. For now, all we know is that she is in a mental health facility, hopefully receiving treatment for her mental health issues and her behavior. But will we know if she gets released? Will we know if she's sentenced? But I do have a question for you. Should children who commit murder be automatically given rehabilitation over sentencing for the simple fact of their age? I will let you discuss that down below. I'll be very interested to hear your thoughts, and I would love to have conversations with you as well down below. But this poor family took their baby to daycare, a place where you have to hope and pray it's safe, because sometimes there are no other options except for sending them to daycare. And because of that, they were never able to see their son again because of another child who was there. Do you think this was an accident? Do you think it was murder? Let me know your thoughts, and don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Don't forget to download Toon Blast for free with my link or QR code.